Chipped ham and football. That's what Pittsburgh does. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode. Brian Batko here from the Post-Gazette. Going to be joined today by longtime beat reporter and my partner, Gerry Dulac. First, this show's presented by Pella. No better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella. They can help you save on your energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella windows and doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560. To discuss further, that's 866-593-1560 to get started planning your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. And there's Gerry Dulac. Gerry, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. Your first time on this particular podcast under the Post-Gazette umbrella. How you doing?
Brian, I am fine. You're right. It's a rare appearance for me, but I'm glad to be with you and, have a little more time on my hands now that the Steelers season is over, but hope all's well and look forward to our chat.
Absolutely. Where should we start, Gerry? Should we start with Ron Cook, who you've shared many planes, trains, and automobiles, or should we start with some of these staff changes for the Steelers? It's player's choice here for you.
Well, let's start with our colleague, Ron Cook, who soon will be our former colleague.
What can you say about Ron Cook? And I mean, literally, what can you say about Ron that won't get us fired or get him terminated 2 days before his final day at the Post-Gazette?
I can't say anything about him, Brian. After all these years, I've at a loss for words to describe him, but I go back a long way with Ron, go back to when he was at the Beaver County Times, and I started at the McKeesport Daily News. And then, Ron then moved to, I think the Post-Gazette was his timeline. I think the exact year, I don't recall. And then I went to the press. And then, of course, when the newspaper strike occurred in 1992, and then the Post-Gazette bought the press, I went over to the Post-Gazette in 93, and Ron has been there that entire time, I believe. He went to the press at one point, and I'm trying to remember what his progression was, because I think he went, and I don't want to misspeak, I think he was hired by maybe he was hired by the press and went to the Post-Gazette. Again, or he went to the Post-Gazette, went to the press, and then went back. I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to be confusing him, because I think Gene Collier actually did that. But in either event, I go back to when both of us were at suburban papers, and that's a long time ago.
And over these last 5 years, just since I've been on the Steelers beat, we've shared many press boxes with Ron, many road trips, plane trips this past season. There were quite a bit of West Coast travel for all of us. And I know you always tell him, Ron, they will play the game without you, but he's really wanted to be there for every game of the Steelers. And we will talk football, but this is a guy who's chronicled football in Pittsburgh for the last 100-some years. So are there any anecdotes that stick out to you, Gerry, about our pal Ron?
Well, I will say this first and foremost about Ron is that, and you touched on it, he wanted to be at the events, and he traveled regularly to just about every Steeler game for any number of years now. He did miss the playoff game in Buffalo this year, but that was for extenuating weather circumstances. Otherwise, he was there, and I give him credit for that, because not for any number of reasons. You see whatever columnists there are around town nowadays, whereas it used to be the columnists wanted to be at the events, and now sometimes it's not a question of whether they want to be, it's whether they can financially afford to be. They're not at events, and Ron would put himself at events, and not just the Steelers. He would go to Penguin games. He would go to Pitt basketball games. He was a big baseball guy. Went to a lot, or enough Pirate games, probably not as much as he used to. He used to go there quite routinely. So I give him credit for that. Columnists don't have to do that now. And as being a talk show host, most of your talk show hosts, 99% of them, don't go to games. partly because sometimes the bosses don't want them to go to games. They don't want them to get too friendly with the guys, or they don't want to be that way. They want to be, or they don't want to do it because they don't want to fire off some hard, crazy opinions and then go face those guys in the locker room. It's easier to sit back and fire at these guys and be critical of these guys when you don't have to face them. But in Ron's defense, and to his credit, he could be critical of people, and yet he would go in locker rooms. And if he had to face the music, and over the years he's had, and he's been critical of guys that he's had good relationships with, especially in baseball. So that to me is the one thing about him professionally that I think is a feather in his cap, without question, over all these years.
And you're going to miss renting cars with him and dining on the road and all the other conversations. You never know which direction they're going to go in.
Or as I told him yesterday, he's going to miss me babysitting him, picking him up, making sure he got his credentials. What time are we going to the game? Could you call me in the morning? Let me know. What time are we leaving? Don't forget, on the way back, I have to do this. And I told him, I says, Ron, I did everything but tuck you in bed. And so I told him, I said, that's what you're going to miss the most, having your Mr. French there to take care of you. And so
and Ray was like his bodyguard, Ray Fittipaldo.
Yeah,
he was kind of just flanked on the other side.
Exactly. And of course, Ray is a little bigger man than both of us. And he relied on us, but that's only normal because, we were the people over at the Steelers. And but I would tease him about that all the time, doing everything for him, but washing his clothes.
And I know the one thing that I will, it'll be weird not to see him in there, and it'll be weird not to hear the first time you make some sort of observation, probably week 1 of the Steelers season in 2024, there won't be his dry, sarcastic sense of humor saying nothing gets past you, Gerry. I don't want it to sound like we're eulogizing him, because we'll all probably laugh the first time that happens next season. But there's always those little asides, and it'll be strange not to see him around.
If I make a remark about something that somebody is doing, or a kind of a quirky rule I bring up, and he always says to me at least once a game, he goes, nothing gets past you. And I go, no. And then I look at my hand, and or I look down at the ground, I go, what the heck was that? And he would do it at least once a game. And he would always tease me about that. But yeah, one thing about Ron, he was very, and anybody, of course, worked with him knows this. He's very intense. After games, he used to pace in the press box, sometimes outside the press box, to the point that he probably wore down a path in the Steeler press box. But in the last few years, I would tell people he didn't pace like he used to pace. I mean, he would pace 10 or 15 minutes trying to, kind of gather his thoughts in terms of what he wanted or how he wanted to write and how he wanted to approach it. And I noticed the pacing had kind of disappeared the last couple of years. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe he wore himself out. Maybe he got enough cardio from his other walks before the game or the day before. He felt he didn't have to pace. But that's kind of, everybody used to see it. Well, Ron's out there pacing again. And it would be like, okay, Ron, you only got so much time. Let's start writing instead of pacing. But that was kind of his trademark in terms of how he went about writing. But he was always very intense. And after the game, you'd be worried about what he wrote. And I'd always tell him, I go, too late now, Ron. You can't worry about it. It's out there. And you just accept it. And you did the best you can in the time limit you had. He hated deadline games. He hated writing on deadline. But you know what? He did it. He didn't pass up games because of deadlines. He just hated those night games when you had about an hour to write a column.
And with him, he was such a workhorse for us as a columnist that he was going to write one again the next day. So you could always shower that off quickly and move on to the next piece. But yeah, we'll certainly going to be strange not to have you here, Ron. We won't say anything more. He'd probably get mad at us for talking too much about him on this show or really anywhere. But yes, in case anybody out there missed it, longtime Post-Gazette columnist Ron Cook. Final day with us and over at the radio station will be Thursday. I think they probably twisted his arm into writing some sort of farewell column, but otherwise, I can't imagine he would have wanted to do that because he's a pretty curmudgeon-y guy until you get to know him. So
That he is, and they had a nice farewell for him yesterday on the radio station. I teased him about me calling in. Of course, I'm not allowed to call into that station because I work at the other one. But a lot of former players and coaches, including Ben Roethlisberger, talking about Steelers, David DeCastro, Al Villanueva, Bruce Arians called, Jim Leland called, Chip Ganassi called, his daughter called, which was the best part for him. But a lot of those people that he's dealt with over the years called the show to wish him well, and so that was very nice for him, and obviously very well organized. Of course, his other old colleague Ed Bouchette called in as well. But they did a nice job of scheduling all those and planning those without telling Ron. So he was pleasantly thrilled and touched by the response.
And unlike our pal Ed, who sometimes joins us again on this show and pops up every now and again and is still very connected on social media, I kind of think Ron's just going to disappear off into the sunset, and we won't hear too much from him down on that beach in Florida.
Well, yeah, literally, because he's moving to Florida, and Ed is still here in town. As you well know, Brian, I talk to Ed all the time, and every road trip, especially in the car, we call him on the way to the game and on the way back just to see if he wants to jump in the car and join us, even though we know the answer to that.
But he answers, though. Ron will probably send us the voicemail if we try that.
Right, but like Ed left the Post-Gazette to go to the Athletic, and he worked there about 2.5 years, and then he retired from that. Whereas Ron is actually getting out a couple years earlier, much to my surprise. But he is retiring from this last show Thursday. His final column will appear Sunday, and then Saturday morning he's on the road to Florida, and I don't see him turning back at all, whereas Ed's still in the area, and I see Ed from time to time. Not sure, unless I'm in that area, that I'm going to see Ron Cook again, unless he decides for some reason to come back here and visit, and I'm not sure what the heck that reason will be.
Well, enjoy, Ron. Congratulations if you see this, and best of luck. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of those departures as well, not from the Post-Gazette, but on the Steelers coaching staff. Gerry, you broke the news yesterday, Monday. Wide receivers coach Frisman Jackson will not be back with the Steelers, will not be retained after his 2-year stint here with that position. What's kind of your thoughts on that? It seemed obvious, I think, beyond even just the production or lack thereof at times and inconsistency, the recalcitrant conduct of the receivers, as you put. Did you text your old vocabulary teacher or anything for that one, Gerry, just to know that you still have that in there?
It's funny, I didn't, Brian, but I got a couple responses from people in the media, about the use of that word, and they enjoyed it. I didn't think.
And boorish behavior is nothing to sneeze at either.
Yeah, I didn't think recalcitrant would get that type of reaction. That is for sure. If my old journalism professor, who would see it, if he read it, he might get back to me, knowing him. But that move did not surprise me. You knew there were going to be changes on the offensive staff, even though those last 3 games probably saved a couple jobs. They still were going to make changes. I don't think you're going to see any changes on a defensive staff, although I think there probably should be one.
No Bill Belichick or Mike Vrabel coming in here as a senior defensive assistant,
That's
Gerry?
Right. None of that. And I am surprised along those lines. I'm more surprised that somebody didn't snatch up Mike Vrabel before even Bill Belichick.
Did you hear this latest rumor out there that teams are put off by his large physique or something like that? I think it was reported.
Mike Vrabel's.
Yes, his
can't be any larger than Dan Campbell.
Is I don't know. That was a little bit out of left field, but I don't know. It seems like it's been a weird offseason for him. Yeah.
Andy Reid has a fairly large physique the other way. I mean, Dan Campbell was a big man, and so, but I mean, at least as big as Mike Vrabel. But no, I didn't hear that. I think Mike is an outstanding coach. I've known him a long time, since he was a player here with the Steelers.
He never intimidated you, despite being, 6'3", 250 or whatever he is.
I see him at the combine, and every year we chat. I would have him on the radio from time to time when he could fit it into his schedule, and so I always liked Mike. I think he's a nice guy. He's an Akron guy, Ohio, which is where my wife is from. And so I always liked Mike, but more importantly, like I said, I always thought he was an outstanding coach, and I was just surprised that somebody didn't jump on him right away. But I think what you're going to see probably a few more changes on offense. Pat Meyer, the offensive line coach, will be back. He is back. Alfredo Roberts, the tight ends coach, I've been told he will be back. But it's still up in the air what's going to happen with Mike Sullivan. Mike Sullivan, the quarterback coach, Mike Sullivan talked to in his year-end, season-end review, if you will, with Mike Tomlin, was encouraged by his talk with Mike Tomlin, as though, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that he would be gone. If anything, it was probably a good chance that he would be back. He interviewed for offensive coordinator positions at Las Vegas and New Orleans. He thought they went well. Obviously, he didn't get those jobs. But right now, there's no guarantee he will be back. And I've been told that they are interviewing candidates for that quarterback position, quarterback coach. And it's unclear to me whether, just based on his conversation with Mike Tomlin, I think he has to be in the hunt. But I can't sit here and tell you for sure whether he is or he isn't. I know this: he has not been told he's out, and maybe that will still to come. I don't know that for certain. And I think the same with Eddie Faulkner, the other coach who was part of the quote co-coordinator setup that they had. I don't know for certain that he'll be back, but I do know, based on what I've told, Pat Meyer definitely will be back, as will Alfredo Roberts. They have to find a new quality control coach. Sorry about that for special teams, and they have to find an assistant defensive back coach. But I don't expect any other changes on the defensive staff.
All right. Well, speaking up for Pat Meyer, that's good. I think that was a reasonable addition, or I guess re-addition, to make in Meyer's case. Everybody likes to get down on him at times, but I think that's probably just the negativity, whereas no one gives him enough credit for helping out Dan Moore Jr. become a solid tackle, moving Broderick Jones over to the other side. So, I think Meyer staying around makes sense. And I just wasn't sure if there would be any sort of awkwardness, if that's the right word, with the Mike Sullivan and Eddie Faulkner pairing, or I guess, you bring in a new offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith, or their, vestiges of the previous system, especially with Faulkner, who a longtime sort of Matt Canada friend, co-worker, somebody who spoke very highly of him even after the Steelers fired Matt Canada. So I wasn't sure too if that would be something that was kind of in consideration by Mike Tomlin and with the Steelers. But Arthur Smith coming in here, he's got to be able to work with some of the guys who are holdovers. And by all accounts, it seems like he's not a stubborn type, or somebody who would be unwilling to sort of mix it up with some new people who he maybe hasn't worked with before. And now he'll get a chance to bring his own mindset and vision, and possibly have some continuity with guys who were previously on the staff.
Well, I agree with you, and I'm with you on the awkwardness that could exist when you're talking about a play caller that such as Mike Sullivan, who did a good job in those last 4 games, especially with Mason Rudolph. So that was a consideration. If you are a new coordinator coming in, maybe you don't want that, only because if things struggle early on, then maybe some of the players think, hey, you know what, we did okay with Mike Sullivan.
It's human nature.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, the fans start thinking the same thing. So I get that part of it. The flip side of that is what Mike Sullivan brings is the consistency and the cohesion, being a bridge from the old kind of staff, if you will, or the old offense to the new one, because the quarterbacks love the guy. Kenny Pickett loves him. Mason Rudolph loves him. They really like the way that he ran meetings, preparing them for games, and it showed. And so it would make sense then in that regard, with a new coordinator, to have a quarterback coach who they know, they like, and can help them through that transition period. So I think that's kind of where they are with this whole thing. But, I'm thinking they'll probably move on from Mike Sullivan. Again, I'm not sure that's the right move. And I don't know that that's a large deal because when you're talking about a position coach, especially a quarterback coach, let's face it, I mean, you're only as good as the talent of your quarterback, but a quarterback coach does help when you're talking about a young quarterback such as Kenny Pickett. So we'll see where that goes. But right now it's kind of in limbo, at least as far as what I've been told what's going to happen there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for hopping on, Gerry. I guess, although I should ask, I'd be remiss not to. Everybody's trying to put two and two together and get Hines Ward for the wide receivers coach position. Do you think there's anything to that, or don't hold your breath if you're a Steeler fan yearning for the glory years to return in some small way?
Well, the only thing that I will tell you, Brian, and I will tell others, would be to not hold your breath, because Hines Ward came in a number of years ago, and I can't tell you what year that was, and he helped out the wide receivers toward the middle to late part of the season. And then he was interested in the wide receiver job when Darryl Drake eventually got that position. So what is that, about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, the late Darryl Drake. Yeah, I think
and I don't
passed
think
in 19.
Right. And I don't think Hines liked the way it was handled in terms of after helping them out and throwing his hat in the ring and basically being ignored for the full-time position. I don't think that sat well with Hines. And so I don't know how much Hines would be interested, not so much in a position with the Steelers, but based on what happened last time, if he'll be in a hurry to try and throw his hat in the ring. I don't want to speak for him, but I know that last process where he was interested and was just left in the dark about it, even after helping them out. I think that didn't sit well with him at the time. Whether that still would not sit well with him, I don't know. But it did not sit well with him back then.
Well, that's interesting. Obviously, fans will clamor for that type of guy. More realistically, the new wide receivers coach will be someone that none of us had ever heard of before, who's been climbing the ranks. But you never know. You never say never. For Gerry Dulac, I'm Brian Batko. Thanks as always for watching here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now channel from the PG Podcast Network. Again, best wishes to our longtime colleague Ron Cook in retirement. For Gerry, I'm Brian. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.